I will be the first to confess that I have a wonderful life. I have the face of an angel and a body designed for love. At least it is what several men have told me. For me, that meant never wanting male attention. And I enjoyed playing on the field until I was 24 years old. Then, after a long discussion with my parents, I decided to settle down and seriously consider doing my civic responsibility by giving them grandchildren. As the only child of wealthy parents, I never required a major qualification or a meaningful career. Dad tried to persuade me to pursue a course of study that would allow me to take over his firm when he retired, but I was uninterested. I'm not sure if it was what initially drew me to Dave, but he seemed ideal. An outstanding physical specimen, sharp as a whip who has already completed a business degree and an MBA. I believe Mom and Dad fell in love with him before I did. We married within a year, and less than a month later, I was pregnant. Fast forward 10 years, and I was the most attractive soccer parent at my two children's private school. I picked them up in a high-end BMW and drove them to our 12-bedroom McMansion in the verdant east suburb of our town. Dave, or the 15-year-old high school girl who lived next door, cared for kids 2 or 3 nights a week while I was out at work as chairperson or board member of this or that church or charity organization. On the weekends, I usually went shopping with some pals. On Saturday, while Mom looked after the kids, Dave and Dad played 18 holes on Sunday mornings. Dave and I took the children to church. I'm not a big believer, but at our socioeconomic level, it's kind of expected, right? We sat in the pew that Grandfather had sponsored after making his first fortune. Later, we'd go for Sunday lunch at my folks' house. Catered, of course, where Dad and Dave just discussed the process of Dad retiring and my husband taking over. After lunch, it was customary for us to leave the kids with my parents, allowing Dave and me to go home and do what married people do best. Some of the things married people do. Early on in our relationship, I resolved to remain conservative in the bedroom. I was really pleased with my hubby. Well, until recently. Yes, I found the ideal man, a wonderful father, a great provider, and a compassionate lover. I had money, comforts, position, respect, and pretty much anything else I wanted. Almost. You've probably noticed my recent struggles in achieving fulfillment. That all began with an erroneous keystroke when I was perusing the internet one day. One wrong key, 60 minutes of browsing with 2 fingers, and my husband's days of satisfying me were over. You know, I came into an adult website by accident and discovered a deep aspect of myself that I had no idea existed. Soon, I was hurrying home from dropping the kids off at school, logging onto a growing list of websites to meet my requirements. The pain itself didn't bother me, but the thought of being confined, chained, and blinded, powerless while a powerful guy did anything he wanted to me made me gush. The first weekend after discovering my safe side, I begged off going shopping with my pals, then feigned to be unwell so I could stay home from church. After Sunday lunch, I attempted to break up with Dave, but was unsuccessful. I ultimately tried raising my hands over my head, gripping the bedhead, and thinking I was bound like that. Even on subsequent Sundays, these fantasies did not provide me with the satisfaction I desired. The apparent solution to my ever-increasing urges was to admit my new fantasy to my hubby. I'm confident he would have done whatever was necessary to keep me happy. However, nice girls do not behave in such a manner. Instead, I turned into a faker. I felt like a tightly wound spring. My collapse began when I discovered an adult, the forum. It had an area where people could meet and tell the rest of the readers how fantastic their last scene was while they were bound and blindfolded. Their remarks were as captivating as the photos that accompanied them. I'll spare you the details, but I met a guy online who was an experienced dominating and lived a few hours away. The photos showed a man in his mid-40s who appeared to be in good form. He informed me he was married, and his wife was not into the scene. He showed me full naked images of himself, but I only sent him body shots. I was quite cautious, and removed all data from our computer, including browser history and work. Some of my favorite things were preserved on a memory stick that I concealed in the lining of a rarely worn handbag. I don't believe I ever made the intentional decision to cheat on my husband. I never had an internal dispute with myself. I simply never took any action to stop things. When the person, his name was Darren, told me to schedule some time off to meet him, I wasn't especially bothered by my conscience. I felt impelled to indulge in a desire that posed no threat to my marriage. Dave and everyone else I knew had no idea, so there was no threat. Nice girls did not do anything remotely like what I had planned. I made a list of everything I would need to cover. Darren must have taken my brief stillness as reluctance. He blasted me with stories of what he planned to do to me when we met. Some of them just weren't to my liking, but we negotiated. I knew that being tied down by a complete stranger was a major risk. However, as previously stated, I was driven. I hinted that our encounters might become more frequent, which meant that if he didn't follow through on the first one, there wouldn't be another. In actuality, I was aware that the likelihood of discovery increased exponentially as an affair progressed, and I had resolved to limit my involvement. You see, I'd done my research. Negotiations are complete. I continued my investigation into not being discovered. I know there's a common belief that cheaters are usually caught, but this is merely propaganda and statistics. Stories and statistics about people getting away with affairs are never published. I assume that for every affair discovered, 10 remain silent. So, over the next 3 weeks, my life settled into a pattern. Drop off kids to school. Hurry home. Watch the photographs and videos of the items I had agreed on with Darren, then read cheating wife stories until it was time to pick up the kids again. My pals grew tired of being refused when they called to ask me to meet, but I didn't notice at the time. Early in this pattern, I learned that one of the most obvious signs of a cheating wife was behavioral changes. A little candid self-analysis revealed I was sending all the signs to everyone observing. When no one was looking, I forced myself to return to my normal routine, especially remembering to propose love to my spouse while drafting a list of precautions. I'd meet Darren at a location at the opposite end of my city where I'd never be recognized. My husband travels for work at least 4 nights each fortnight. He was, after all, the business development manager for his father's company. It shouldn't be too difficult to establish he was where he said he was. When I called him that night, I asked him to take a picture of his room because I missed him and wanted to visualize where he was. I would only leave the house after around 10 p.m. That way, no one would call or visit me, only to learn I was not present. I planned to leave my phone and car at home in case someone had trackers on them. I'd meet Darren at a low-cost motel somewhere. My acquaintances were highly unlikely to spot me. That made me smile. I know at least 3 of my pals had successfully concealed affairs in the past. Wouldn't it be hilarious if I was discovered by a buddy meeting her boyfriend at the same motel? I've added a wig and other disguise items to the list. I'd store them in my locker at the tennis club so they wouldn't be noticed for long. I would pay cash for the accommodation and reserve it either in person a few days ahead or over the phone at one of the charities I volunteered for. I would take a taxi to the motel after walking to a nearby park. That way, no unexpected cars would be visible in the driveway, and I wouldn't be observed leaving at an unusual time due to cell phones. Phone booths were a thing of the past in our town, so the only flaw in my plans was that I would have to call the cab from my phone. The best I could do was promptly delete all recordings of the call. Dave was unlikely to pull my phone records to verify each individual mobile number, so my husband and pals were accounted for. The only challenge remained was deciding what to do with my children. Our regular babysitter needed to be home by 10 p.m., but couldn't be relied on. Not to mention sitting while Dave was gone from my hubby. I wasn't going to let a stranger look after children, and the youngest was too little for sleepovers. That left only one choice, which was not particularly appealing. I could see my kids and restrict my time away. Say you'll leave at 10:15 p.m., 1 hour. After a cab journey, 5 hours with Darren and another hour in the cab, I was home by 5:15 a.m., which was still an hour before daylight at this time of year. The wig and coat I rarely wear should keep me from being recognized by early morning dog walkers and insomniacs. I was determined, regardless of how unpleasant it was to sedate my children. The closer my preparations brought me to realizing my new fantasy, the more complications I encountered. In fact, it took a lot of resolve to critically assess my own plans. I experimented with various over-the-counter sleeping medicines, all of which were labeled as safe for small children, and discovered dosages that required me to wake them up for school. I did it every night for a week to assure a 100% strike rate. I only stopped when Dave commented on their new habits. During one of my internal security review sessions, I was concerned about what would happen if Darren turned out to be a serial killer, or even if he went too far and marked me by crossing our agreed-upon boundaries. I noted his email address was an initial and surname, and after a half hour of searching Google, I got an address. I abruptly informed him that I would be leaving clues to his identification before we met. He told me that even if I went missing, I would be protected. I also saw his weakness in getting caught cheating on his wife, which led her to me and my spouse. So I urged that he take the same precautions as I was. I couldn't believe his wife knew and condoned his meeting with other ladies. He gave me the STD test I requested because I prefer to leave my love unprotected, and there was no possibility of an unplanned pregnancy due to the contraceptive pill I take religiously at 8 a.m. So tonight's the night. It's 10:10 p.m. I completed dressing in a silky black dress Dave bought me a few years ago, and my overnight bag, which contains toiletries and a few odds and ends, is packed, as my grandmother used to say. According to caller ID, Dave called from a number with an area code that corresponded to his expected location. A 3-hour flight away. The cab was on its way and the children were safely and sweetly asleep in bed. Of course, I ended up paying cash for 3 nights of room hire under a fictitious name. Darren came up with the concept for the extra nights, which I believe is a good one. By the time I arrived and had to leave to go home before daybreak, we'd only had 5 quality hours. What if I enjoyed it and wanted more? Dave was absent till his flight arrived at midday on Thursday. I could repeat what I did tomorrow and Wednesday night. After all, the money for the hotel was meaningless to someone as wealthy as myself. 3 nights to get it out of my system. 3 nights to avoid it becoming a long-term issue in which the odds of being detected increased tremendously. Yes, it was a sensible decision. I logged onto our computer to check for any last-minute emails from Darren. There were none. I checked the deleted items folder, which was clear of evidence, and then wrote a fast note to my soon-to-be master, informing him that I was on my way. A peek at my watch indicated that it was time to walk to the park and meet the cab. After one last look in the mirror, I considered whether I should back out even now. But enthusiasm said, no. What might go wrong? I put my phone on the kitchen counter and walked out. I was quite excited by the time the taxi dropped me off at the motel. Nobody was around, which was a comfort. I grinned as I lightly tapped the room 310 door. The Do Not Disturb sign was already hung on the doorway. When Darren opened the door, there was only one dimmed bedside light on. My initial feeling was of disappointment. His profile image on the website must have been very antiquated, as he was perhaps 10 years older than I expected and much heavier. I subsequently noticed his fingers were smeared with nicotine, and when he kissed me, there was an unmistakable odor of whiskey mixed with stale cigarettes on his breath. That was as far as I got before. After a single greeting and a kiss on my lips, he jumped on me. I heard the dress shred as he rushed to remove it. I loved it. I was hoping he recalled his pledge not to brand me. However, the sound of his breathing indicated that he was not in full control. He was as excited as I was as I basked in the feelings, which were already heightened by my sense of powerlessness. I reflected on how I had done the right thing. I could experience 3 nights of risk-free ecstasy and no one would ever know. However, stopping my new interest anytime soon may be a challenge. However, I'm confident that the hazards might be avoided with additional investigation. Tuesday, 9:45 a.m. Jan, this is Dave. The kids just called to say Sue was not there when they got up this morning. They scoured the house but couldn't find her. At this moment, Dave paused to regain his breath, which had been shortened by the adrenaline rushing through his system. His mother-in-law was concerned about the tone of his voice. "Well, she's not here," she replied. "Can you come over there as soon as possible?" Dave questioned. "Sure. I'll call you when I get there," she responded. Tuesday at 6:53 p.m., Thursday, 8 p.m. Dave, who had flown home as swiftly as possible, had just finished hugging his children tightly. They were putting on a brave face, but he could tell by their eyes. They were quite worried. He turned to his in-laws and expressed gratitude for their support of his family. "Have you contacted the cops again, Pete?" Dave questioned. "Yes." The same answer, unless there is proof to the contrary. They believe a person simply walked away during the first 48 hours. The location was as needed as a pin with no notice. Sue hadn't simply walked out the door. Dave interrupted. Except her car is still in the garage and her phone was on a table near the back door rather than on the charger where she usually keeps it. Sue's mother, Jan, observed that the conversation was upsetting the children and rushed them into the kitchen to continue cooking dinner. Dave and Pete head to the study. Dave's father-in-law spoke in a more secretive tone. Her phone was present, but her house keys and bags were not. It's as if she stepped out to the corner shop and never returned, except that the nearest corner shop is an hour's walk away, and my Sue would never abandon the kids like that. Dave answered. "There is one more unusual thing, Dave. I found them on the kitchen counter." The elderly man showed him a bottle of over-the-counter children's sedatives and a little measuring cup. The obvious explanation for those products' presence escaped the notice of a man who adored his wife and valued her dedication as a mother beyond all else. The thought that she had purposefully put them to sleep was so far from his image of his wife that he dismissed it and returned to fretting. His children last saw their mother at 9:30 p.m. when she put them to bed. The night before. Where was she? His own phone call to the police corroborated his in-laws' statements. There was no commotion in the house, and his wife's handbag and house keys were gone. They assumed she had merely walked away and did not want to be found. It happened. Dave then contacted everyone in their address book. Nobody had seen Sue. He and his in-laws focused on diverting the kids. Nonetheless, everyone in the home struggled to get enough sleep that night, in the morning. Dave lurched, bleary-eyed, into the kitchen, where Pete was already halfway through his coffee. They exchanged pleasantries until the older man expressed his thoughts. "Dave, have you checked her email yet? You have access, right? Good thinking, Dad. Unless she changes her password, I will be able to access her account." They went to the study and turned on the family desktop. Sue's password worked, and the couple began snooping. The inbox appeared regular, and sorting the emails by sender and quickly scrolling down the list revealed no strange names. Pete, who was more experienced with computers than his son-in-law, suggested they look in the deleted objects folder. It was vacant. The older man's heart sunk slightly further. He suggested Dave check his mailed items folder, fully expecting it to be empty as well. It almost was, except for a single email received to Hardman shortly after 10 p.m. on Monday. The simple message was chilling. "I will be there shortly." Sue either didn't bother deleting it, or it was communicated after she removed the sent items folder. Dave moved his head away, revealing the bottle of junior sedative from the night before. Just as Peter followed Dave's gaze, a link clicked in his thoughts, and they both reached the same conclusion. "Surely she wouldn't have a father?" Dave questioned. "Have you a better theory?" Pete answered. "He is angry at his wife, Fought for dominance out of fear, Sue appeared to have seated her own children to meet someone on Monday night and had not returned. Dave called the police again, this time armed with circumstantial proof of foul play. They refused to become involved, but did suggest that he take the children for blood tests, which he did. He dropped them off at school late and then returned home. Once there, he emailed Hardman. Simply tell Sue to come home. Her kids are worried. If you've hurt her, I'll discover and destroy you. Wednesday night went by as slowly as the previous one. The pathology lab called early on Thursday morning to report that the children's blood tests contained relatively high levels of substances seen in sedatives, potentially indicating a crime. The police finally took the issue seriously and requested the email address located on the computer, but told them not to get their hopes up because identifying people using an email address was difficult at best, without anything else to do. The three adults then sat near their phones waiting for news. Thursday at 8:01 p.m. I stood outside my front door, unkempt, tired, and afraid. I grabbed my tattered, silky black dress, the same one I'd worn Monday night to keep it from gaping and revealing my left unbound chest. I took slow in and out breaths, attempting to relax myself and forget the nightmare of the last 3 days, trying not to worry about the immense storm that would hit in the next hours, but rather the nightmare I couldn't shake. Memories of my nightmare. I remembered, what felt like years ago, that feeling as my initial exhilaration faded with a sweating Darren over me. He must have noticed the joy in my eyes, and being a sadist, he didn't like it. He reached past my left ear and grabbed something from beneath the pillow. It was a black leather gadget that resembled an old-fashioned cat, or 9 tails. It included several leather tassels, each with a knot at the end. He continued to thrust away into me, peering into my eyes as he elevated the device. I suppose my look had already changed before the first searing hit landed on my chest. It hurt. My eyes and muffled cry must have communicated this to him. The sight on his face when he lay down with the device was horrible. I looked down and noticed the angry wheals on my chest. His repeated assurances not to make me lasted less than 5 minutes. It was only then that I realized how helpless I had made myself. My thoughts was racing with fear over what Darren would do next and the state he'd leave my body in. Strange noises drew me back from where my terror-filled head had gone. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was that Darren's face had lost its eagerness. It was replaced by an expression of misery. He gasped and clutched his chest, his face turning a sickly white. As I watched, he collapsed on me and jerked for nearly a minute before making a sound I'd only read about in literature. Unpowered lungs were suddenly ejected of air as gravity performed its thing, and the sound was unmistakable even to those who had never heard it. And scary. Darren was gone. The entire weight of him was crushed down. My chest ached, and it felt like every time I exhaled, I lost the ability to inflate my lungs. I thrashed around in panic, but because my arms and legs were stretched out, I couldn't generate any leverage to shove him off. Finally, I believe it was my sweat that lubricated our physical touch, and Darren's body moved into a position more on my stomach than my chest. His head was in my left armpit, and when I looked down, I saw his sightless eyes open and staring at me. Something unpleasant was oozing from his mouth since his stomach was somewhat higher than his head. That odor clashed with my own vomit. As bad as this encounter was, my fear reduced its significance. It was about 11:30 p.m., and I was locked here, unable to cry for aid because I couldn't communicate beyond a grunt or reach a wall to touch it with any body part. I was locked here till a maid arrived to see if the room required anything. At 9 a.m., my children would have awoken from their slumber, gone into Mummy's room to wake her, and discovered her gone. I could image their terror when they discovered the house was empty, which caused me to worry and thrash around even more. I regained control, however, as I considered moving Darren's body back to a position that was squeezing my lungs. I stopped moving and cried instead. What would my children do if they found themselves alone? Go next door to the neighbors, or use the speed dial sheet next to the house phone to contact who? Dave or my parents? Neither one was good. Dave would be afraid and confused, and he would instantly call my cell phone, which would ring from the table near the entrance at home. Then he'd call my parents, and Mom would rush to the house. Dad would be at work. She would find me gone. Perhaps my phone, but I'm missing my purse. And then what? Ring Dave. Call the cops. Either way, I was done. Unless. And now my mind was grasping at straws. The maid arrived quite early, and I got her to discover the handcuff keys and let me free, then offered her enough money that she wouldn't call the cops right away. But I could get my hands on about 10 grand swiftly and untraceably. I could rush home as soon as possible, hopefully rouse my children, apologize for sleeping in, and drive them to school before calling the police. I could threaten them with legal action if they told the media and had everything handled. By the end of the school day, or arrange for Mom to fetch them up. It was not a big deal. Two consenting people engaged in a legal action that simply happened to go horribly wrong. That was all good. Everything would work out great. Then I realized I had reserved the hotel for 3 days, which was good. The housekeeping service still checked each room daily for fresh towels, etc. But then I remembered the Do Not Disturb sign on the outside knob, and all my illusions vanished. I heard myself make a noise past the gag. It was a sigh. My marriage and lovely existence were ruined by my and Darren's bile, and based on the signals my bladder was sending, I'm guessing I spent the next hour desperately attempting to remove the gag. But all I had to rub it on was Darren's cheek, and it wasn't firm enough. It looked a little better until the rigidity of death set in, and I was almost able to remove the gag. What struck me was how Darren's whiskers seemed to grow even after he died. Closing my eyes kept me from seeing the frightening rictus. His face was ugly, but nothing could shield me from the progressively awful stink that pervaded the room. Death won't smell very soon. The rigor subsided, and Darren softened again. By that time, there was nothing left in my stomach to expel. Daylight filtered through the tightly closed drapes, boosting the room's temperature just enough to alleviate my shivering. Darren's cooled body was sapping the heat from mine, and the problem of thirst was far greater than the risk of hypothermia or the humiliation of lying in my own pee. How long can a person be without water? I believe it was as low as 2 to 3 days. I might have known if I'd paid more attention at school, rather than focusing all of my efforts on making sure my clothing were nicer than the other girls' and revealing enough to attract the majority of the male attention in the room. Then I realized that death would be better to what was coming my way. My legacy and memory may be decimated, but I won't be there to see it. The brightness of the curtains revealed that the sun had fallen far enough to pierce the short gap between rows of rooms at the cheap motel, confirming that assistance would not arrive that day. Already my tongue was plastered to the roof of my mouth, and I hadn't urinated since around midday. Small blessings. I hoped I could speak quickly enough to prevent the maid from calling the police when she found me in the morning, even though there were no police present. All types of explanations were plausible. However, as the night progressed, I recognized some of them as fancy fantasies caused by total desperation and thirst. I believe my final conscious thought before a crushing headache and disorientation overtook me was simple. I am screwed. One dumb decision reduced Hero Mother to a 0. I've never met the maid who found me, even though I really want to. One day I'll be armed with something dangerous. My first memory was of being jolted on a trolley as they loaded me into the ambulance. I was connected to one of those gadgets that drips something into you. The ambos had clearly detected my severe dehydration and started me on fluids. They had also stuffed my handbag alongside me. My next memory was of being taken into the hospital and someone attempting to take my suitcase away. I clung to it like a grim death. I'd call my family when I was ready and had a decent chance of defending a convincing narrative. Until then, I planned to remain anonymous by applying heat packs and ivy, followed by little sips of water. By the afternoon, I had physically recovered enough to think clearly again. The cops interviewed me, which disrupted my plans. I kept to the facts and reminded them of their duty of prudence, threatening them with legal action. Personally, if the media learned about my story. As he went, the sergeant gave me a look that appeared to be a mix of amusement and sympathy. I had a plausible narrative by mid-afternoon, but I'm not going to bore you. Much of it depended on my family being so relieved by my unexpected arrival that they didn't ask too many probing questions. Just before 7 p.m., the staff doctor freed me from his evening rounds, and I hastily changed into my tattered dress. On my way out, I asked the nurse whether there were any apparel shops open at this time of night, and she responded abruptly and coldly. No, she did call me a cab, and I waited for it at the hospital entrance. Regardless of my attire, I am quietly confident. There was a television in the reception room tuned to the 7 News, which destroyed my confidence and my life. The main story was about little old me. There were images showing me laying on the motel bed beneath a deceased Darren, clearly shot by the maid and sold to the media. My face was blurred out, I assume for legal reasons. After all, it was a coroner-controlled scene. However, television cameras showed no such courtesy. How? They had beaten the ambulance that was leaving? I will never know. But they did. My face was clearly visible as the gurney was pushed up to the ambulance. They even showed one of the shackles that was still fastened to my wrists. I crashed emotionally and had to be helped to the taxi when it arrived. Who gave the driver? My address is a secret. But the next recollection I have is of standing right here, right now, facing the door leading out to the execution yard, empty of hope or even the desire to resist. Monday, 11 a.m. Any misconceptions I could have had lasted around 300 milliseconds. My husband opened the door over his shoulder, and I could see the television, which was tuned to the station I had lately seen myself on. He lifted an eyebrow in question as he stared deeply into my eyes. This was it. This is my defining moment. My opportunity to claim that I was kidnapped, handcuffed to a bed, and tormented for 3 days. That I deserved his pity, not disdain. Then I looked at my phone, which was still on the table next to the entrance. I held the purse in my hand and looked down at what I was wearing. With that final glance, any fight I had left was sucked away. I went to my knees in humiliation and defeat. Dave didn't have to say anything, as if that was not enough. I heard a high-pitched voice asking from behind him, "Really, Sue? Are you doing this to your own children?" That was my mother's voice. If my mother was confident enough to condemn me, I knew I would be completely written off in my father's eyes. He adored Dave as the son he never had, almost as much as he did with me. I'm not sure how long it was. After the door banged in my face, I heard a voice behind me asking for my name. It was the police. I was arrested, handcuffed, brought to the station, and charged. When faced with evidence of my fingerprints on the sedative bottle, my absence from the family home, and the children's blood tests, I saw no need to deny anything. Naturally, the media erupted into a frenzy. A high-profile mother is doing this to her children so she can have a tryst with her lover. And not any kind of lover. She's dominant. And then said, while she's tied to the bed and trapped for 3 days, that angle just added fuel to the fire. I challenge you to write a more emotional story. After 4 nights in jail, as it became clear that no one would post bail, the authorities released me on my own recognizance. Someone must have alerted the media, as they were all waiting for me outside the jail, and it was the longest walk of my life until they abandoned me. When my feet led me to the town's main thoroughfare, I considered my options. Did I mention Hero 20 before? I meant a hero to a negative million. My shallow society buddies would never associate with me again, fearing being coated with my venom. My children were old enough to comprehend that I had put them at risk and betrayed them in the worst way a mother could. Furthermore, they had a devoted father and 2 close grandparents. They didn't need me. If I stayed, I'd be ridiculed and scorned until the memory of my actions faded, then shunned till my death. I checked my handbag to see how much cash I had. Less than $200. I noticed a cash ATM across the street and decided to check if any of my cards still worked. It was a 50-50 probability in my opinion, but we all know how poor my judgment has recently been. If any of my cards worked, I'd head left toward the bus stop. If they didn't, I'd turn right toward the bridge, crossing the lengthy drop to the river. I pushed the first card in while holding my breath. Here's the next story. Hello, everyone. Let me begin by saying that my wife and I are quite open, perhaps too open, about our past and previous partners and so on. She's my second wife. My first wife was a huge believer in faithfulness, and we split up because she cheated. The first wife and I have a son. My wife has a daughter from her previous marriage. We've been married for 5 years, and our small blended family works well together. TLDR. My wife's ex-boyfriend writes her about a writing project they worked on years ago. She cheated on her ex-husband with this man about a decade ago. I'm scared that old behaviors will return. As I previously indicated, we may be overly honest about our former relationships. Her first husband was a serial cheater. He was a musician who slept with ladies at his shows. She stumbled into his emails and discovered that he was associated with 5 other women, one of whom he had gotten pregnant. Not wanting their child to grow up in a shattered household, she sought advice from one of her old internet pals, whom we will refer to as Chris. The two had been friends for 7 years but had never met. They were writing partners. In fact, before losing communication, they were working on a novel together. She tells me that when she reached out for help, he was extremely nice and had actually been advocating a lot of methods to get past infidelity or what you should speak with an attorney about, as well as being a wonderful friend. They eventually decided to start writing their book again. According to her, they would discreetly flirt, but because they lived on opposite ends of the nation, they lacked the means to act. In the midst of all of this, she decided her marriage was over and quit attempting to save it. I suppose she checked out. She and Chris indicated mutual attraction, and by the end of the year, he had flown out to meet her. She filed for divorce shortly after the affair became physical, and Chris moved later that year to be with her. To cut a long tale short, her 5-year-old daughter did not particularly like him. According to her, he did nothing wrong. She was just not coping well after the divorce and didn't like having someone replace her father. My wife informed him they needed to take a break because of this and the fact that he can be a bit crass at times. She had only intended for it to be a temporary pause, but he was supposedly so heartbroken that he had traveled so far only to be turned down 2 months later that he ended it completely. After months had passed, they reconnected to try to finish the novel. During this period, they resumed sleeping together, but just for physical reasons. They were near to finishing the book, but she began dating me, so they stopped sleeping together. She felt strange having an ex around after she was in a committed relationship, so she stopped responding to his emails, which were all book-related, on a regular basis and stopped working on it as much. He became frustrated after a few months of this and barred her from everything, which leads us to a month ago. After 4 or 5 years of no contact, he messages her unexpectedly. He contracted COVID and almost died. Chris contacted her because apparently, during that time apart, he revised the book without her input, had it published, created and published a sequel, and launched his work, which came dangerously close to being unfinished if he died. He wanted to make it clear that if anything happened to him, he wanted the rights to this thing transferred to her because she knows how it will finish and helped write the story. Okay, that sounds fine, but then they start talking. He appears to be developing a comic adaptation and has encouraged her to join the project. He's finished a lot of the work, and she was very happy to show me and explain who all the characters were, their backstories, and what she thought he did wrong with the design. She also read the first book and is telling me whose names he altered, which characters were and were not in their version, the plot differences, and she seemed to be having a great time with it. I knew they wrote together. She had mentioned it before, but I had no clue they developed an entire universe. I can see it was something very important to her. I'm concerned since she appears to be considering accepting his offer. Every time they've worked on something in the past, it has resulted in sexual activity, and there is some sexual content in their literature. I'm not the jealous kind, and I certainly don't want to step on a dream she had buried, but I also don't want to repeat history. I'll admit that I snooped on their chat, and while he appears to be on the level and only talking about the project, she wants to know about his personal life. I wouldn't say flirtatious, but she asked him if he was seeing someone right now, and when he said no, he's too busy and relationships get in the way, she told him he needed to get back out there. That celibacy doesn't look good on him. We're quite open about our previous sex lives, so I know her ex-husband was bad at it. And once, while intoxicated, she told Chris, "Don't let a great convince you it'll be a great relationship." How in the hell do I proceed? I understand she was emotionally broken by her ex-husband, which is why she cheated, but she did cheat with this man. I've met him, and he appears to be a kind guy, but their past suggests that something bad may happen. I'd like to contact my wife with my issues, but I don't want to come across as pushy or domineering. I want her to have a creative outlet because she glows in ways I've never seen before when she talks about this book about which I know very little. It appears that she forced something that was very essential to her to be unimportant. I want it for her, but I don't want their interactions to escalate further, as they have done 3 times now. Update number 1. My wife's ex-boyfriend resurfaced in her life, requesting to collaborate on a shared writing project she abandoned years ago but is now financially successful with. I'm not sure who this woman is. The amount of deception is so extensive and deliberate that I find it difficult to believe that I've spent the last 6 years of my life with this individual. I decided to sit down with her and tell her how I felt about the issue, that I was glad she rediscovered her old writing and that it would be great for her to pursue it as a hobby or a profession because she's pretty good at it and clearly enjoys it. At the time, she agreed and stated that having Chris, her ex, around would not be a good thing, as she was concerned that he would use this as a ploy to talk to her again. When she stated these things, I was like, well, good, she has the same concerns as I do. And she isn't downplaying my feelings or labeling me controlling. In fact, we're on the same page. Oh, how wrong I was. That chat should have been the end of it, but for some reason, my brain started acting strangely. And I began to suspect that everything was going too perfectly. When she got in the shower yesterday morning, I snatched her phone and went into it. His phone number was there, and their entire discussion had been wiped. It hadn't been 3 days before. Red flags. I checked Facebook Messenger, and she was talking about her planned work trip to Vegas. Apparently, this 2-day event has been canceled due to COVID, but she has been telling me she will attend. They're talking about staying at a hotel a town over and texting each other people's Vegas trip photos, so she'll have something to show me if I ask. She's talking about places they can visit, and how there will be a full moon when he arrives, which would look amazing on the beach. Oh, and he's not on the East Coast as he claimed. He recently relocated back to town since the idiot actually has enough money to live here. He showed her where he lives on Google Maps, and it takes all in me not to drive my vehicle right into his living room. She said a month ago that she needed to pick up her brother at the airport, but nope, that was him. The texts don't go much further back than that, but they include talking about things from the years they reportedly haven't communicated. I read one line from him that made my heart race with such crazy. Yeah, we're just friends. I don't see you in 8 years, and I'm inside you 20 mins off the plane. Best friends, maybe. So she hasn't just decided to be with him intimately. She's been doing so for months. That trip to her mother a few weeks ago, where she spent the night, yeah. I haven't confronted her yet, but her smile makes me so angry right now. I'll do my best not to say anything till after Christmas. The kids don't need the holiday to serve as a continual reminder of this, but I'm probably going to snap and approach her today or tomorrow, since swallowing this garbage with a grin is nearly hard. Honestly, I'll be lucky if I don't take a bath with the toaster. I'm losing my mind right now. Edit 1. I'm gathering information, photos, and screenshots of her location before meeting with a lawyer tomorrow. Edit 2. I met with my brother's divorce attorney, and we are making preparations. I'm documenting everything, including her communications, whereabouts, and where she claims to be going. I'll face her on the 2nd of next month after she's gone to the hotel with him. I'm making sure I have everything in order and trying not to spoil Christmas for the kids. Edit 3. The wave of suicidal thoughts has passed, and I want to thank everyone who left wonderful notes for me. They really helped me get over the hump. I'd want to thank everyone who gave me advice when I first posted this yesterday. It helped keep my mind off of darker places and gave my hands something to do. I've been communicating with my brother for support and have continued to observe their interactions. She observed me acting differently, and I told her it was simply me having the blues over my aunt's death anniversary, which was enough to keep her from understanding I knew everything. I spent 3 hours today in my car outside a McDonald's using their internet to read her emails, while they communicated via filthy Yahoo Messenger. She is on here with her tits out in a slew of photos, all of which I am storing. There's one of her posing with flowers that I gave her for her birthday. They've been sexting since around March. Some selected quotes from her. I can't just start talking about the book all the time. I talked about you twice when he and I got together. If I started talking about you and the book a lot now, he's going to think something is up. You need to shave because that stubble is like knives. Almost had to put chapstick on my chin and under my nose. His words. You're getting it right before you leave here. I want him to kiss you after you spent the afternoon swallowing me. Honestly, I feel compelled not to beat this man to death. I will not do it. But the fact that he is so purposely wicked makes me want to wear his teeth as a necklace. Update 2. A heads up, I started writing this the day it happened and I'm not going to rewrite it. So if some of my feelings don't precisely match what my comments said in the last few days, that's why. I've got some stuff to accomplish today, so I might not react for a while. TLDR. I confronted her. She attempted to lie. I produced evidence. She continued to lie, and she is currently residing with her parents and attempting to lie. I don't ever want to go through this again. This was the most difficult thing I've ever had to do, and I'm still twitching like a tweaker from time to time. She departed for either work or Chris's today. I'm not sure where she went, but she was gone. I tried to find her whereabouts, but either she had turned off location services or my phone was having problems. I didn't have the resources to serve her. That would come later this week, but I needed to confront her before she noticed what I was doing, so she wouldn't have any more time to concoct any working lies. I heard my garage door open and switched on the camera. She walks in absolutely unaware. I tell her she should sit down because we need to talk. She gives me a deer-in-the-headlights expression before sitting down and asking what's wrong. I ask, "Why don't you tell me?" She plays stupid, but I can tell she knows she's been found out, so she asks me again what's wrong. I ask her what's going on with Chris, and she replies she hasn't heard anything from him. I redirect and decide not to address her directly, telling her that I am uncomfortable with her working with him and that it is not something I can overcome. She's completely agreeable and anxiously questions why I changed my mind so quickly and why I'm acting the way I do. I just shake my head and say something like, I wanted to be understanding about it, but he gave me weird signals and I'd rather they didn't talk. She says that he no longer means anything to her and that she was simply pleased to see the book published. I told her that he effectively stole from her and she is way too understanding about it, that she should sue him over it, and she agrees. By now, she's probably thinking she's out of this and will end her relationship with Chris as soon as she has the opportunity. But then I tell her that the whole incident has really stressed me out and I'm going to take the next week off work. I inform her that I spoke with my son's mother and she agreed to keep him that weekend so I could go to Vegas with her. That's why I spent so much time the other day talking with my son's mother, working out the specifics of her taking my son, or so I hoped she would think. Deadpan expression. I start talking about how COVID has shut down a lot of things, and I'm not sure what's still open in Vegas. She cuts me off and informs me that it was indeed canceled today. The chat will now proceed as follows, paraphrased, of course. Me. It was canceled last month. Her. No, he informed us today since he wasn't sure if it was off till today. Me. I know it was canceled last month. Her. What are you doing? Why do you tell me you want to go and then say it's canceled? I don't understand what you're doing. Me. It was canceled last month. What were you going to do if I hadn't asked about it? Her. You are freaking me out. It was canceled today. Me. What were you going to do in... Her. What are you accusing me of? Me. How long have you and Chris been back together? Her. We have not done anything. Did he tell you that we were? Me. Don't lie to me. I don't want to read off everything he sent because it almost had me throw up the first time. I cannot believe you would do this. Her. I love you, I'm sorry. He's been texting me a lot recently and saying a lot of messed up stuff, and I'm not sure how to deal with it. I wanted to tell you this, but I was worried you would do what you're doing right now. I really hoped he would stop on his own. Me. You hadn't seen him in 8 years, and 20 minutes after he got off the plane, you had sex with him. Her. Which plane? What are you now reading? Me. He lives on. Do you want to stop this? Please admit what you did so that we can move ahead. Why did you tell me he resided in the East Coast? Her. Did he say anything to you? He regularly lies, which is one of the reasons we split up. I told you that. I knew I shouldn't have responded to his messages. There's always drama with him. All of his messages were nice. Then he started talking about missing me again. Like he always does. I was about to tell you. He wanted you to come home and kiss me after you went down on him. I read your messages, which I noticed in both your email and texts. You are cheating on me, and I want you out of this house today. Her. What? I am not cheating on you. If you don't want him around, I will tell him to go, but honey, I am not cheating on you. Is this what he told you? He is lying. Me. Stop it. I told you, I checked your messages on your phone. You're going to gather your belongings and go to your parents. I saved copies of your emails and took screenshots of your texts. I don't want to show them what you two are saying to each other, but if you continue to lie to my face, I will. We're done. Go get your stuff. Even in the face of all of this, she tried to be ignorant and lie. But I eventually got weary of it and handed her my copies of their texts. She glanced at them for 2 seconds before bursting into tears. Like I've never seen her so upset by anything. I even felt sorry for her for a short while. She apologized, saying things had gone out of hand and she wanted to stop it. But he had become possessive and threatened to expose her if she terminated it with him. I informed her that none of this was in their texts and that she was still lying to me. She planned to spend the weekend with him. She then told me that it was over between them and that she would make him leave. She would never speak to him again. I told her I don't care what she does, but I've been speaking with a lawyer and the divorce papers will be ready shortly. At this point, she erupts and screams, "You've been talking to a lawyer?" 4 or 5 times, and I was about to call the authorities because she was closing in on me and yelling. I advise her to relax since I have a camera going. She then proceeds to break down and resembles no one I've ever met. She kept saying things like, "You just planned all this out," smiling to my face, just planning this all out. To which I retorted, "Well, look at what you've been planning and smiling to my face while you're out doing." When I asked her why she would do this to us, she initially couldn't give me a straight response. She tried to convince me it was pointless sex, and I said, "Oh, "So you ruined us for no reason. That's great." After a while, she became quieter, and I'm not sure if she was being honest or just trying to hurt me, but she clearly messed up with him in her eyes. She called him her soulmate, and I nearly broke something. I asked her why she didn't abandon me for him at first. I would have understood, but she said she just needed to get away from him because she knew how horrible she'd look to her family if she brought him back. Evidently, they didn't like him too. She also stated that she could never and will never be with him since her ex and daughter would fight her over it. So returning to him honestly was never an option. She immediately apologized and appeared to be taken aback by how firm I was about everything. She told me how big of a mistake it was and how much she would change and do everything I asked to remedy the problem, but I told her no. She then informed me that we would not be getting divorced because she could make amends. I told her there was nothing she could do to win my forgiveness, that I would never forgive her for this, and she had the audacity to be startled. I then told her that I had opened an account in another bank and transferred half of the funds from the joint account into it this morning and that the rest was hers. She could get it herself or I could get it for her, but the account was being closed. She simply nodded and said, "We'd probably have to go to the bank together to shut it." She went and began packing her clothes gently, crying a bit and, strangely, making warnings every now and then that she had better not leave anything behind. I let everything slide off my shoulders and told her to take pictures of how she left her and her daughter's belongings so that when she returned, she would see I hadn't touched anything. Her parents have been called and are in amazement. They were both startled that Chris was involved in any of this, and she spent time apologizing to me before leaving my house. The next day, STBX bombarded my phone with so many "I love you, I'm sorry we can solve this" texts that I considered flushing my phone. I wanted to turn it off, but my son's mother had him, so I needed it turned on in case of an emergency or a change in plans when he returned home. So I just began responding to her SMS by providing screenshots of the worst sections of their conversation and saying nothing of my own. My son's mother returned with my son and brought me food from my favorite Chinese restaurant. I didn't give my kid the entire reason when I told him, but he inquired straight away whether she cheated because it was so quick, and I told him he was correct without further explanation. They stayed for a bit before coming home, and I've just been floating around the house, trying to keep things together. It's been around 2 or 3 days since I started writing this, and I'm headed to the gym, then to my lawyer's. This thing is already far too long, and things are changing so quickly that I could type indefinitely and never finish. My STBX's ex-husband is going to come by and take his daughter's belongings, and I'll do my best to convey to her that if she ever needs me, she can just call. I'm also thinking of telling her ex that she ran around with Chris on him because she has repeatedly stated that he is unaware. But maybe I won't. That accomplishes nothing. Anyway, the first combat has been waged, and it appears that I am winning as much as possible given the conditions. Part of me wants to confront Chris, but I'm clever enough to realize that would be a waste of time and effort. Time better spent working, going to the gym, or finding a way to express my gratitude to my son's mother for being an absolute MVP in my corner during this. Anyway, that's all I have for now. Update 3. Just before Christmas last year, just over 2 months ago, I found that my wife had been cheating on me with an ex-boyfriend. They had planned a lovely weekend together, but I wrecked everything for them by confronting her. TLDR. The crazy drama has concluded. I'm still seeing my stepdaughter. I've made an odd friend in my soon-to-be ex's ex. My son is soldiering on, and my son's mother has saved this walking corpse from falling over. This is going to be long. So, as an update, I've generally avoided touch with my STBX. I tried interacting with her through my lawyer if we had a legitimate cause to speak, but it made me feel like a child avoiding confrontation, even if that wasn't the case, so I opted to speak with her directly a few times. If you've been following the lengthy comment streams from my prior postings, you'll be familiar with what was discussed, but I'll go over it all again here as if it were the first time. The STBX's comments regarding Chris were inconsistent at first. One moment he was her soulmate and the one who escaped, the next he was a predator who would not leave her alone. Our family and friends have all learned the truth by now, and the majority of them have chosen my side in the matter. Given the information I supplied in my lengthy Facebook post, there was little room to side with her anyhow. She has subsequently moved in with her parents for the time being, and I have remained in my own home. It was obtained many years before I met her, so it isn't even a divorce problem. Strangely, Chris, the AP, chose to write me this massive harangue, sick of a letter, for reasons unknown. I got the impression from it that she must have dumped him in anger shortly after I gave her the boot because it's laden with stuff like, "We were repairing our relationship when you stole her from me. I've loved her for X amount of years, so don't post stuff online about how I'm a cheat." It really made me see red, and I wanted to do the man some serious physical harm, but I saw reason once more. Since she and my stepdaughter moved in, life in this house has been somewhat lonely. The stepdaughter's room is still vacant, and I have to keep the door closed because seeing it empty always bothers me. And I can't bring myself to do anything with it right now. She has a father, and he's a terrific father, which is why I still see her once a week. I take her on bike rides or go out to dine together. I asked her if she felt safe eating at my house, and she burst into tears. She adores her grandparents, but does not enjoy living with them, so she has begun spending more time with her father. Her old man has had me over for a beer a few times, and we've talked about our common ex and Chris. I believe I mentioned this in the comments on my last post, but he was aware that she was cheating on him the entire time. I spend a lot more time with my son and his mother now. One of my weekdays coincides with their schedule, so I'll pop in for dinner, and I've started giving him an extra day on weekends, and she usually joins us for dinner on Friday nights. I asked my kid if he wanted to talk about how he feels about my upcoming divorce, and he isn't saying much, but he is hurting. The first couple of times he just gave her this distant face and said, "I don't want to even think about her," despite the fact that he loved her and didn't expect her to do this to him. And when he said that, it hit me hard. We often think about how someone's affair affects us, as if it were a malicious act against us. But hearing what she did to me, from him hurt more than anything she could have ever done to me. I've addressed therapy with him and his mother, but he says he's fine, and that if he feels he can't take it, he'll talk to us. He's a mature kid, and I trust his judgment. He's typically very open about how he's doing. He and I spoke privately for the first time about his mother and my divorce and the reasons for it. I didn't want to at first because he is now angry about adultery and has a good relationship with his mother. But he asked about it, so I chose nice honesty. I told him that his mother had wounded me just as much, but that what she did was a poor choice, and that I'm no longer sad about it, albeit it took some time. Speaking of my son's mother, she has been there for me through much of this. She's mostly responsible for me having dinner with them once a week and keeping my son for longer periods of time, because she believes it's better for me not to be alone in that house all the time. Many individuals have urged that she and I reunite. If I ever had to make that decision, I would want to wait till I had completed some therapy sessions, possibly couples therapy, if she was in this ballpark. We did briefly discuss our own divorce and the infidelity that caused it. I've moved on and am not bothered by it anymore, but she talks about it as if she was just caught. It is not the first time I have done this, but I told her I forgive her. I also added this time that based on how she recounted the experience, she was most likely preyed on by some creep since she had too much to drink. This wasn't a guy she knew well and had only seen around her workplace a few times because, if I recall correctly, he either didn't work in her area or worked somewhere else. In either event, she has not seen him since a few days after the incident. It's also difficult to think about since, while it no longer bothers me on a regular basis, the truth is that I was thoroughly enjoying my life until she brought the awful news to me. When that relationship began, the STBX helped to smooth things over for me. But once again, just when I thought my life was going well, Infidelity ruined it for me. It makes me very hesitant to explore another relationship if this is the outcome of all of my work and effort. All that being said, I'm planning a trip to Disney World in July to try to clear my mind. Originally, it was meant to be just me, my son's mother, and my kid, but I persuaded the STBX to let my stepdaughter come along so she doesn't feel excluded. She'll undoubtedly use the time to bang her next unlucky victim, but that's no longer my problem. Update 4. In short, one day my wife of 5 years said that an ex-boyfriend she used to write with reappeared and asked if she could work on an old common project with him. As you may expect, she had been having an affair for quite some time. Their nasty emails to each other sickened me since they were so harsh, almost purposely so. It wasn't awful enough that she cheated on me, but he stated he wanted her to return home and meet me with him, so to speak. I kept my shit together for the kids for Christmas. She has a daughter, and I have a son. I confronted her, kicked her out, and avoided making any more contact. Her AP, Chris, wrote me a few texts after the fact, claiming that I had no reason to be unhappy because, in his eyes, I stole her from him, and that he had been nursing this one-sided grudge for the last 5 years and spoke as if we had been enemies for a long time. In brief, my STBX's family did not approve of him, therefore, she dumped him. She went on to say that they were soulmates, and that was why she couldn't turn him down. Well, I've been maintaining my health by working out and working from home, but that will come to an end shortly. I've maintained contact with my stepdaughter through her grandparents and her original father, whom she also cheated on with this man, though he's cheated on my STBX several times. He's a decent person to have a beer with, and for all his flaws, he appears to be a nice father. I see her twice a week now, never overnight, and I've left her former room empty since it's too dismal for me to do anything else with it. She's been my princess, and she always gets happy when she comes to visit, or when I show up to take her out to dinner or on a bike ride. After a while, my son determined that he could benefit from treatment, and has begun visiting a doctor. His mother, my first wife, and I had been keeping an eye on him because he was quite close to his stepmother. She's tried to call him and apologize, but he refuses to speak to her. He began acting impulsively and having violent outbursts unrelated to her, so I asked him whether he believed he might benefit from treatment. He told me how betrayed he felt by what she'd done, how much he despised her, how much he missed his stepsister, and how he simply wanted everything to be erased. And I felt bad for him. I don't think we've ever talked or embraced as often as we have in the last several months. His mother has been by my side for the majority of this, and we have grown closer as a result. She initially invited me over for supper a couple of times a week, since she believed it was unhealthy for me to spend so much time alone in an empty house. I'm around more frequently now, and we eat dinner together as a family many nights each week. My parents and her parents have both seen this and have asked us if we would consider reconciling now that things are going so well between us. We both say we're content with things the way they are. But knowing everyone is talking about us makes it tough for us not to talk about it ourselves. Except for the physical intimacy, we're basically acting the same way we did when we were married, which is nice and warm, but it's soon going to get to the point where we need to have a long conversation. All that has been said so far is that nothing will be attempted or discussed until our son's life returns to normal. These changes harmed him, as for my STBX and how things are going there. According to what I've learned, she recently purchased a condo and is moving on with her life. Her mother and father are terribly ashamed of what she's done, and they say my stepdaughter routinely backtalks her mother. I'd like to tell you all that she's in serious pain or is in tears, but STBX appears to be on her way to wreck another guy's life. I did, however, run into Chris at the grocery store last month. He became pale white, and I pointed him out to my brother, which I should not have done. He began following him around and shouted variations of, "Prince Charming over here, being oh so perfect. Fat loser's gonna eat both those red barons tonight before he starts texting your wife, guys." I pushed us to leave and will be shopping elsewhere, but I did have a good laugh over it. Update 5. The texts exchanged by the ex-wife and Chris demonstrated how planned and deceptive they were. "I'm not sure if I'm being paranoid," she said, "but I feel like my husband is growing suspicious. I'm trying to act normal, but I'm really starting to worry." Chris answered swiftly with advice. "Don't change your routine too much. If you act distant, he'll notice. But if you're overly friendly, same thing. Just keep it professional, like it's about the book. Don't mention me beyond that." "Yeah, that's what I was thinking," the ex-wife responded. "But honestly, I think he's wondering why I'm on here with you so much. I need to start talking about the book. It's the perfect excuse," Chris agreed, adding a dash of humor. "Mention my wife is doing concept art for it. Makes me seem domestic and non-threatening." "Good idea," ex-wife said. "If he asks anything, I'll just make stuff up on the fly." Their communications went back and forth, with Chris reassuring her. "You'll be fine. If he says anything, just laugh it off, like, 'Oh my God, he's married and totally obsessed with his wife.' It'll shut him down." Ex-wife laughed. "I can handle this. It's probably all in my head anyway." Chris was ready to offer her his support. "Exactly. You've done this before, and you're great at it." "True," she conceded. "I just have to fight the urge to make a whole checklist for this adventure. You must think I'm neurotic," Chris responded in a friendly tone. "Not at all. I like seeing this side of you. The planning, the paranoia. It's kind of exciting." "Fine. I'll let you take credit for that," the ex-wife jeered. "But you've definitely elevated my paranoia to a new level." Their chat, full of jokes and reassurance, demonstrated how comfortable they were in their deception, and how willing they were to deceive others to keep it going. Update 6. This week a year ago, I was sitting around trying to comprehend my ex-wife informing me about her ex, Chris, contacting her with the idea of creating a book based on their prior work together. It was an obvious front to advance their ongoing romance, and I was so foolish not to notice it. Anyway, I confronted her and pushed her out, and she moved in with her parents, taking her stepdaughter with her. I kept in touch with my stepdaughter for a long time and continue to make time for her, but she has had it worse than everyone else. I suppose I'll offer an update on it first. My stepdaughter was effectively taken by her biological father shortly after my last update. I've said it before, but her father is not from my country and holds citizenship in the country from where he immigrated. Every few years he would take his daughter to his native country to see his relatives, but this time he refused to send her back. His stated reason was that our mutual ex-wife was poison, and he wanted his kid away from her. In the end, he shot himself in the foot on that front because 2 months later he caved to pressure from his own family and returned her, and he is not returning because he will most likely be arrested if he returns to the United States, so he removed himself as a positive influence in her life and left her in the hands of someone we both consider poison. Things did not improve from there on my ex's end. She began dating a new man shortly after the divorce was finalized, but before her ex-husband took the child. I was ignorant of this until my former in-laws informed me that she had been hospitalized. She and Chris, her affair partner, had, as many suspected, resumed sleeping together, and according to what former Mile told me, she broke up with him again to chase another man. Chris drove her to a Motel 6, where he told her he was sick of being treated the way he was. When she attempted to walk back to her car, he snapped, lifted her over his head, and threw her down on the concrete parking lot. He attacked and drove away a good Samaritan before stomping on one of her hands and choking her so severely that she had dark purple bruises and a damaged vertebrae in her neck. Thankfully, he's now in jail and faces a bunch of assault charges, possibly even attempted murder, although I haven't followed up on any of the legal elements. She is in physical therapy and recovering after being concussed in the assault and is often fuzzy. Regardless of what she did to me, seeing her in this situation crushes my heart. My stepdaughter spends a lot of time with me these days as I attempt to do everything I can to help the situation. She is understandably down, but spending time with my kid, his mother and me, provides her with a stable foundation on which to stand. That left only my first wife, my son's mother. Different individuals have voiced their desire for us to reconcile, and we have done so in different ways. Neither of us is forcing the other back into a relationship, but we have talked about our past, the infidelity that led to our separation, and the fact that I have forgiven her. We aren't formally back together, but it's not uncommon for us to spend the night at each other's homes, and it's been 5 days since we've slept in different residences. We sleep apart, which I'm sure disturbs my son, but we've been intimate for almost a month now. Nobody is pressing for anything more than what we have, and things are going well for the time being. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened. Take care.